Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Scrappy Startups with Bill Rue. Today, I'm joined by Logan Burgess. Logan is the co-founder of Caldera Cacao, a great craft chocolate manufacturer right here in Bozeman, Montana. Now, Caldera embodies the Montana spirit of adventure, craft production, quality, sustainability, and creativity. We're going to explore Logan's journey to become the founder of a craft chocolate factory with his wife. Big or small, all chocolate manufacturers are international businesses. What makes Caldera different is how it uses the supply chain to create very innovative products. Also, we'll dig into how he's building up this great startup through partnerships and unique online subscriptions. So let's jump in and learn more about this fascinating startup and industry. Well, I want to welcome Logan Burgess. He is the co-founder of Caldera Cacao. And today we're going to talk about chocolate, which is fantastic, and being a craft chocolate maker. So Logan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me here, Bill. Appreciate it.
But why don't you take us through, how you grew up and how that impacted you, when you going to school, and
Yep.
how the experiences come together to end up starting what is a very cool company.
Well, appreciate that. Yeah, the short story is that I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I was fortunate to have parents that encouraged me to see what kind of college options might be out there. So I ended up coming down to Bozeman because growing up in Alaska, I was really into snowboarding. So I wanted to find some place where I could make snowboarding part of my college experience. So came down to Bozeman in 2006 and studied finance here, and as part of the finance program at Montana State. Took part in some entrepreneurial classes as well. They have a great entrepreneurship program up at MSU. And really kind of throughout my life after college, I've never worked at a true startup, but I've always worked at companies that have, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. So, very, very small teams where a lot of people are doing different roles. And my first job out of college was actually working at a commodity brokerage and analytics firm where we were working with farmers to help them determine where to sell their crop. So like a farmer in Iowa, when they harvest corn, they might have 20 or 30 different grain elevators they can sell to. Our job is to help them figure out where the best market was and to use the commodity market to help hedge price risk. So it's interesting. I'm sure later in this conversation we'll get into sort of how that relates to some of the work we're doing now as it relates to buying cacao. That was my first job out of school here in Bozeman. And then I sort of, I turned to writing. I worked as a financial writer, and I'm still working as a financial writer here as we get this operation up off the ground. And so I've been doing that for the last, 8 or 10 years now at this point. But what really got kind of the chocolate company started was for the last 10 years, my wife and I have been traveling and spending time in Latin America, sometimes for some extended trips. So in 2022, we spent 3 months down in Ecuador and Mexico City and Costa Rica for a little bit of time, but the majority of it was down in Ecuador. And during that trip, I went down out of shape and I surfed for 30 or 40 days straight. And by the end of the trip, I needed shoulder surgery from sort of a hockey injury that had been exacerbated by this out of shape surfing endeavor that I was on. So fast forward to being back in Bozeman, and I got shoulder surgery, and I was spending a lot of time in a lazy boy recliner. Consuming giant amounts of YouTube. And through that process, I stumbled on this show called Craft Chocolate TV, where they were talking about what it means to make craft chocolate. And the episodes that I was really drawn to was the episodes where they were talking about sourcing the beans. So they would be talking about, we're working with this farm or this cooperative that's near Guayaquil, Ecuador. And Lauren and I had been down in that part of the world, months before. So I got really into those episodes, and sort of in the process of sitting in the lazy boy chair with nothing else to do, I started ordering small 5 to 10 pound bags of cocoa beans to the house and roasting the beans in our oven, which is a fun project if anybody out there is looking for a I guess it's more of a winter sport. So maybe in the fall it could be a good thing to explore. But there's a lot of companies out there that'll sell you 5 or 10 pound bags. If you stop by our shop, we're happy to sell you some if you want to play around with roasting cacao. And then through that process, kind of it started out as a hobby. And then, as we like to tell people, it sort of has now spiraled out of control. We're having a go at running a chocolate company here in Bozeman, Montana.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So just, digging into that, what was the hardest thing about starting up the business? It sounds like you had a lot to learn about making chocolate and the
Yeah.
beans and how you source all that, but you
Yep.
also had a lot to learn about the laws, in the US, but in Montana. What did you find to be the hardest thing? Raising money, getting the legals worked out, just figuring out the recipes? What did you struggle with when you started?
Yeah, I think the unknowns around legality and is definitely a big aspect. I don't come from a food manufacturing background or a commercial kitchen background, so kind of getting up to speed on that was definitely a challenge. My wife has who's partner in the business. It's just the two of us. She has a strong background in commercial kitchens, so she was able to pull some weight there to help close the gap, which was really great. But then in terms of other challenges, yeah, I think honestly cash flow is the biggest one. Like especially in the early days, you're buying a lot of cocoa beans that, you might not make good chocolate out of. So that's sunk money there. In the early days, and we're still in the early days, just to be totally clear, but in the very early days, let's say, the line between buying cacao and selling good chocolate was very circuitous with a lot of inefficiencies. So I think it was that was probably the greatest challenge, is thinking, oh man, this bag of cacao is going to cost us $800. Do we want to do that right now? So I think if there was one thing that was the most challenging, it had to be that. Everything else, there's right now there's a lot of great resources out there for people who want to learn how to make chocolate. I took a course from the École Chocolat Professional School of Chocolate Arts. It was an online course with a lot of sessions where you had to sort of do different objectives and then do an involved report on what you had done, where it went well, where it went wrong, and you get feedback on all the steps. So we were fortunate in that regard to have a lot of good mentorship when it came to learning the process of actually making chocolate, because we're a very small chocolate company, but all the steps that we're doing are identical to what a larger chocolate company would be doing. Obviously, we're just doing it on a much smaller scale, and our focus is doing it with higher quality ingredients. And in that way, chocolate is sort of going through a craft reformation right now, very similar to what we've seen with coffee over the last 15 years and then brewing over the last 15 to 25 years, where you see a lot more smaller producers coming into the market that are doing it on a much smaller scale, trying to take more attention to detail when it comes to ingredients. And I think, craft chocolate is interesting that it's sort of catching up right now in some ways to what we've seen happen in coffee.
You said something when we talked earlier about you were really in a third generation or a third wave of chocolate. You mind just sort of filling us in on how you see that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best model for it is what's happened in coffee and brewing, really. The first wave are the giant producers where they're making beer or they're making coffee, but they're doing it at a massive scale, and there's not a lot of attention to detail around where the inputs are coming from, or sort of that craft approach that we associate with smaller batch items, right? So I don't necessarily want to throw names out on the podcast here, but if we can imagine the largest coffee manufacturers in the world that sell their coffee for the lowest per unit cost at the grocery store, right? That's first wave. Second wave then are companies that are taking more attention to detail, and they're opening up cafes, and they're still large companies, right? And they still kind of have that ethos of high growth and trying to expand what they're doing, but they're taking more attention to detail around what's being produced and how they're producing it. And then the third wave is like local coffee shops like Treeline Coffee, for example, in Bozeman here, that has extreme focus on traceability in the coffee that they're roasting. They have an extreme focus on the ethics of their supply chain, and on the finished product, there's an intense amount of attention to detail being paid to it. And the breweries in Bozeman as well fall into that third wave category as well, where things are done, even large brewers in Bozeman are still doing things on a relatively small scale when you compare it to what PBR is doing or other folks like that. But they're certainly of that sort of third wave movement as well. So I think, this is a long answer to your question, but in summation, chocolate is sort of now going through that reformation as well, and it's been happening in earnest in the United States for the last 10 or 15 years, where instead of only having a small collection of really large companies manufacturing chocolate, you're seeing more smaller makers like us come into the market and try to pay greater attention to detail around sourcing materials and, the ethics and the output of that.
And so you, if you look, you still have to compete with the big guys. You compete
Yeah.
differently,
Yeah.
but I assume, in coffee, the beans matter a lot
Yeah.
as the quality of the product, right?
Yeah.
And so I assume for chocolate it's the same. Is that true? And then how do you find yourself competing, and how do you find the beans that, make your craft chocolate just so much more interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, there's kind of, let's call it 8 or 9 steps that are involved in converting, buying cocoa beans and making chocolate. And when it comes to the quality of the finished product, the most important step out of all of those has to be the buying of the beans. Because even if like we do an exceptional job roasting, an exceptional job grinding, if it's sort of the old adage of like garbage in, garbage out, right? If we're using a really low quality bean, we're never going to produce the level of chocolate that we want to. So we pay a lot of attention to the sourcing, and we put a lot of energy into that. I think if you look at, Lauren and I spent 3 weeks ago, we were down in Guatemala and Belize visiting farmers and learning from them. And a big emphasis on that trip was to learn more about, as you alluded to, what are the different options that exist when it comes to cacao genetics and how that cacao is being fermented after it's harvested. Because a really interesting thing about chocolate that not everyone is aware of is that after cacao beans get harvested off the tree, they get fermented for 6 to 7 days. And in that fermentation process is when you start to get the precursors for those roasty, toasty, chocolatey notes getting created that we then bring out through the roasting process. So a big part of our focus was to go down there, learn from the farmers, but also get more knowledgeable in terms of the different types of cacao that we may want to be working with. Because if you look at cacao genetics as a whole, there's kind of 3 primary genetic varieties of cacao that exist. There's a sort of variety that's referred to as an heirloom variety. There's a variety that is associated with heavy commoditization and selective breeding for yield. And then there's a mix between those two. And below those 3 categories, there exist a lot of subcategories. Right. So to your point, I think as a chocolate maker, one area that we've been putting a lot of energy into is just sort of understanding what the universe of possibilities is out there, and then steering our process toward those origins that have those flavors that we want to bring out. And if you look at chocolate in general, there's sort of 5 major flavor profiles that people associate with chocolate, sort of how chocolate can express itself. It's a floral component, it's a sort of ripe fruit component, it's a woody or sort of nutty component, and then it's sort of that like earthy, like mulchy component. Like when I think about how chocolate can express itself, those are kind of the big flavors of where things go. So as chocolate makers, we obviously want to find cacao origins that really are able to express those things in an interesting way. Because the one thing that, as you said, how do we differentiate ourselves from the big dogs out there, is that the big dogs by definition are blending thousands of different farms together. So what they're producing is sort of the average of a specific region. Like for example, in West Africa, right? They're getting cacao from so many different producers that you're sort of tasting the average of that region. What the craft chocolate maker is trying to do is be hyper-specific, sort of similar to what you see in wine, saying we don't want the average. We want this one bean from this really interesting valley in Peru that has this really wild flavor that people didn't really know chocolate could even taste like. So I think when we think about differentiation, that's a big one, right? Is it's not trying to be the average. It's not trying to taste like the average cacao. It's trying to experience those flavors that maybe people didn't know cacao was capable of producing. That's the funnest part for us, I think.
And how many farms have you created relationships with? Did you know them beforehand, or you do everything remote? You go see them? How do you interact with them? And what's their response to a little guy versus a big guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a mix. So when we were on this most recent trip, we flew into Guatemala City, and then we traveled by road to Belize City. And across that trip, we visited 5 farms. So 3 of those farms, I'm trying to do the math here, 3 of those farms were folks that we had been connected with through our import partners. So as you alluded to, we're at a scale right now where we're not quite big enough to go to a farm directly and to say, hey, send me a shipping container of your beans. Like, that's where we want to get to, but we're not there yet in this project. So we're fortunate that there are some really good import partners that exist in the United States that cater to craft makers like us, that are really transparent when it comes to where they're buying their cacao and how much they're paying for their cacao. Because, if you think about the sort of well-earned bad reputation that chocolate has when it comes to labor standards, slave labor, child labor, pretty much the worst forms of labor you can imagine, chocolate has rightfully been associated with over the years. The mechanism, or what really drives that at the farmer level, are these really long supply chains that exist between a farm in Ghana and a chocolate maker in the United States. When a farmer in Ghana sells their cacao, it might go through 4, 5, 6, 7 different hands before a chocolate maker starts actually using it. So if we think about ethical trade, and doing trade in a way that we feel proud of, a huge component of that is to A, identify exactly who we're working with, and then B, try to minimize the middlemen or the intermediaries in that supply chain between us and the farmer. So the solution to that is, because we're at a small scale and we can't buy directly from the farmer in most cases, we have one origin where when we buy, I go down to the bank and send a money wire to their account in Quito, Ecuador. That's true direct trade, and that's where we want to go. In most cases, we're using one of these values-aligned importers who's very transparent with us of who they're buying from, how much they're paying. And to answer your question directly, in some cases, like when we were organizing this trip, I reached out to them and I said, hey, we've been using this bean. We love this bean. We'd love to meet some of the farmers that are growing it. So they helped set up those time spent together. And then in some cases too is just like a good old-fashioned Google search. Like, hey, we're going to be in Rio Dulce, Guatemala. I'm going to Google search Rio Dulce, Guatemala cacao, let's see what comes up, and then it's a matter of sending emails and getting those things organized. And we found that people were amazingly generous with their time and with their knowledge and sharing with us what they're doing, because I think, as I said, the big problems in cacao, or not cacao, but the big problems in chocolate really originate from these super long supply chains. So I think when the farmer sees us coming to them and saying, we want to work with you directly, we want to eliminate middlemen as much as we can, and we also want to learn from you in terms of what's a good partner and what's a bad partner. I think, people were just amazingly generous, like I said, with their time. And so, again, another really long answer to your question, but as I think about how we set up those meetings, I mean, it's a mix of having great partners that we're working with to help point us in the direction, and then it's also a mix of just getting on Google and typing keys and seeing who pops up, and then reaching out and saying, hey, and asking if you can stop by. You know what I mean?
How do you think about your end product? How do you think about bringing creativity to it? How far do you try to take that creativity? How far do you come to just repeatability as you move forward? And what do your customers want?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's been a huge theme for us in the last year, because if the price of cocoa, and by the way, for anybody listening, cacao and cocoa are the exact same things. The word cacao is more used in Central and South America. Cocoa is more used in Europe and Africa. So I'm using those terms interchangeably, but they're interchangeable. 2 years ago in West Africa, there was a giant drought. About 2/3 of the world's cocoa beans are grown in West Africa. That made the price of cacao shoot through the roof. And right now, cacao prices are at 40, 50-year highs. That situation has also, between the drought and the extreme volatility in the price, by volatility I mean prices going higher, has also created a lot of chaos in the market as new people come in. Drought is taking old people out. So if we specifically look, our focus here is buying from Central and South America. And while there was significant drought in Guatemala and Belize last year, the main driver of the commodity price of cacao going sky high was what was happening in West Africa. But the Central and South American markets aren't immune to sort of the global commodity market that's happening. So there's been a ton of chaos when it comes to, I won't say a ton, there's been a lot. I guess I would describe it as a reshuffling of the deck, right? Cocoa origins are coming, cocoa origins are going. So in the last year, that's been a big challenge for us, is to navigate those changes that are occurring in the market. And like you said, it has encouraged us to put more of our energy into making blends, because if you make a blend, right, a 70% dark chocolate bar that's made from a blend of cacao, that sort of has more durability than a 70% dark chocolate bar that's single origin, and that origin, if they have a drought next year, you can't make it. So as a chocolate maker, to try to navigate some of that volatility in the deck getting shuffled, it definitely has encouraged us to make more blends and to use more local inclusions. Like we're doing a couple chocolates right now with Steep Mountain Teas in Bozeman, where we make a 70% chocolate that's made from a blend of cacao. We then include their tea as a component there. We're doing a smoked nib right now with Grotto Meats in town, where we bring our cocoa nibs over to them. They cold smoke them, we get them back, and then we add those to, a blend. So I guess it's being creative in sort of how you can still make unique products while trying to manage some of that volatility and uncertainty in origins. Because as you alluded to, I mean, I think, this last weekend we were at a sip and sample event with the Rotary Club here in town. And people get really excited about single origin chocolate because it's so new. And maybe people, they know conceptually what single origin is from wine or coffee, but they've never seen it before in chocolate. So as a maker, my bias is towards single origin. That's what I'm most interested in. But if but if the origin situation is really volatile, it makes it really challenging to do single origin. So long story short, I guess we're trying to figure out the balance there between that single origin chocolate and, using what we call a Caldera blend, which may be 3 or 4 or 5 of our favorite cacao origins from Central and South America. But it gives us a little bit more flexibility, because if next year, let's say they have another big drought in Belize and we can't get that Belize bean, it's still going to be Caldera blend if it's 4 out of the 5 that were in it last year. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of still giving customers a chocolate that they love and really enjoy, but also kind of making it something we can make year after year in an uncertain world where the climate of growing cacao in Guatemala and Belize, from what we hear from the farmers, is getting harder and harder. That was a big question this year for us, and it's going to continue to be a theme.
And so how important are partnerships to you? How have you gone about it? What are some of the more interesting partnerships you've done? Ones you really like? What have you learned about doing partnerships?
I mean, I think just as a starting point, it's awesome to connect with other people that are making things and folks that are really proud of the quality of what they're making, and they're really intentional with how they're sourcing their inputs. So just from getting beers with a friend perspective, it's awesome to connect with other makers like that. So like you said, to add to that, I think the other component that is helpful for us is that, we're a Bozeman chocolate company. Cacao doesn't grow in Montana. So how do we make chocolate that is distinctively Montana and distinctively Bozeman, and something that maybe you can't find in Ecuador or Belize, because there's hundreds of chocolate makers our size who are making awesome chocolate in the United States and at origin in Guatemala, Belize, Ecuador, Peru. So the partnerships is a really fun way to connect with people that are just fun to hang out with and fun to talk through challenges and opportunities with, and also a way to sort of integrate more of that local flavor, quite literally, into what we're doing. And like I said, we've worked with Grotto Meats to do a smoked nib 70% bar, which has been really, really fun. People have been excited about. We've worked with Treeline Coffee to do a coffee crunch, where we use some of their coffee sprinkled on top of a 70% dark bar that we do. And then right now, we've been using a chai blend from Steep Mountain in Bozeman to mix with 70% chocolate, which has been one of our most popular last year at the farmers market. And right now we're in the process of working with them to kind of figure out what are some other blends we might want to work with. It's fun to work with other people that are doing something different, but there's so many parallels in sort of the excitement around it and the interest in doing something with a lot of intention.
So what are your most popular products these days?
So our most popular single origin was or has been a single origin Peru chocolate that we make. We actually, last year, we submitted that chocolate to the Academy of Chocolate in England. Every year they have it, throughout the year there's probably 3 kind of big chocolate competitions around the world. The Academy of Chocolate in England is one of them. In September, we sent away our Peru chocolate for judging, and we ended up getting a silver award from them, which was awesome.
Wow, that's impressive actually.
Yeah.
18 months into it.
It was really exciting. Yeah, it was humbling to be on the list with some of the people. They get chocolate from 6 continents, so to be on that list and to this early in the project, it definitely was validating as we kind of try to figure out what we want to be doing and how we're doing it. So it was great to get that award. As I alluded to before, unfortunately, in this case, this origin comes from a cooperative called Ucayali River Cacao, and unfortunately, the leader of the cooperative had some health issues, to my understanding, and unfortunately they had to close. His health is paramount to everything, greater than anything I'm talking about here. But it made us want to figure out how to kind of find another origin like that we could be really excited about, and we have several that we're working with right now, and we're sort of gearing up right now for another season of award entries. So hopefully, the next time we talk, we have some more little ribbons, to talk about. But I think that's been a super popular chocolate. That single origin Peru, just the work that they were doing down there in Ucayali River was exceptional when it comes to the cacao origin and how they were fermenting it. When you open the bag, it smells like fruity pebbles coming out of the bag. It
Wow.
has that much fruit and that much of a beautiful acidity on it. So a super unique cacao, and just shout out to them for all the work they're doing, because like I said at the beginning of this conversation, if we start with cacao like that, it's not rocket science here that we're doing. If we can start with cacao like that, I mean, at the end of the day, right, we're roasting seeds and we're grinding seeds. So much of the work that we do is representative of the exceptional work by the farmers and the fermenters, and that was definitely the case with them. So single origin Peru's been super popular. Our coffee crunch has been really popular as well. We probably have 5, I would say, that have been popular last year at the markets a lot, and we're kind of in the process right now of thinking about new flavors for this new season coming up. So hopefully I have some more to share with you in the future.
So I think, you do direct sales. You go out to the
Yeah.
retailers, send it out,
Yep.
and I suspect you spend a lot of time doing that. You work with
Yeah.
your partners to create events and I assume push it through their retail channels. But I was pretty excited. You have a chocolate club like the wine producers have
Yeah.
wine clubs. So tell us a little bit about the club and
Yeah.
when did you start that and how you finding it?
That's actually, so how we started the whole business was my wife's idea was to do a subscription. So, it's $25 a month if you pick it up at the shop here. It's $30 a month if it's delivered in Bozeman. But the premise of it is that every month you're going to get a random selection of chocolates from us. Some of it's going to be single origin. Some of it's going to have inclusions like, coffee or smoked nibs or chai, that kind of thing. And it's really designed for adventurous chocolate lovers. So if you like adventure, if you like a good surprise, because when you open that box, you don't know what's going to be in it, right? So it's dealer's choice. You open the box, you get 3 chocolates that we're excited to share. It also comes with a little maker's note where we share stories about the cacao that's used to make the chocolate and share some of the process, the roasting time, the grinding time, things like that. And it also includes a poem from my wife, who's a really talented writer. So right now we're running that in the winter time because shipping chocolate has obviously it's a challenge in the summer, right? We don't want to mail melted chocolate across the United States. So right now it runs from September to May. So May is going to be our last month for this current season of the subscription, but we'll be back in September if that sounds like an interesting thing for anyone to experience. But that was a really nice way to start the business because it sort of forced us to be making chocolate every single month with somewhere for it to go. When you first start a business, there's so much of this. You have a lot of excitement around it. Maybe you have, your production capacity probably exceeds the interest in what you're even making. So it was a really nice way to try to align, our goals in just making chocolate and getting feedback and also sharing it with more people. So I need to give my wife a shout out for that idea. That was a great way to start, and it's been an exciting way to sort of share what we're doing with people on a more recurring basis. Because a huge part of any craft chocolate maker, a big priority is to help educate people on how it's made and what does make it different from maybe what else is at the supermarket and why it's at a higher price point too. And I think through a subscription, it's a great way to kind of share those stories and especially for people who want to learn more about chocolate, it's a great way to sort of explore the world of chocolate that's in a little bit of a deeper way, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I think you answered this, but I want to move on to our last area, which is really talking about
Yeah.
Bozeman and Montana. The first question
Yeah.
is you really indicated, you talked about your chocolate is embodying spirit of Bozeman, spirit of Montana in it. What does that kind of mean to you? I think you answered it, but I'm curious.
I don't know. I think we're still figuring that out, you know? I think a really great way is to work with other makers because we're working with a product that doesn't grow in Montana, it doesn't grow in the contiguous United States. So to get that local flavor, working with other folks that are making amazing things is a really nice way to do that. And then as far as the spirit of Bozeman, I don't know. We're still figuring that out, you know? I might need to report back to you on that one, but we're having fun with it, and I think it's just been really fun to share with people and to get their feedback on it. It's definitely not been an easy project, but it's been a fun and a meaningful endeavor that we're on. So the people of Bozeman have been really nice to us, and you know I need to give a shout out to Front Porch Chocolate as well. They're a chocolate maker who was in Bozeman for about 3 years. They just moved over to Livingston and set up a chocolate factory there. They've been super welcoming to us. Greg and T are great people. We were over at a party at their new factory last week. So I think, you know, as craft chocolate makers, it's really important that we share ideas with each other and we support each other. Because one thing that Greg and T shared with us when we first met up with them for drinks, you know, when we got this project started, was this idea of trying to grow the sport. And right now, so few people understand or kind of have visibility into how chocolate's made, that if we can help more people learn about it, it sort of helps. That it's like that old analogy of a rising tide raises all ships. And so I want to give them, I think when I think about Bozeman, I think about the community of makers that exist here. You know, Front Porch Chocolate, check them out. Le Chatelaine, check them out. A lot of really good chocolate being made around southwest Montana here. So when I think about community, that's what I think about. Yeah.
So last two quick questions. Any favorite retailers you'd call out you've called out a few, but any favorite retailers you'd call out here in Bozeman or Montana you love?
Yeah, I mean, I love Front Porch Chocolate. Shout out Front Porch. Check them out in Livingston. I love Le Chatelaine. We had to kick it with them at the Sip and Sample this weekend. You know, they're doing amazing things with chocolate over there. Check them out. And then the folks that have been nice enough to carry our chocolate around town. Stacy Townsend over at Common Form Jewelry in the Cannery District. Love Stacy. She's been a big part of this project. So check her out. We're in Treeline Coffee. Natalie Van Dusen over there has been amazing, helping share knowledge in terms of how to run a roaster, how not to, you know, let your roaster catch on fire. We had a little roaster fire here about 4 months ago. It was a small one. It was a very small one, but we did have a little flare up. And so Natalie's been awesome just in helping us figure out how to run some of this machinery because our roaster is a coffee roaster that we're using for cacao. So check Treeline out. They carry our chocolate. Check out Coffee Crunch with them. Little Creek Feed, Townsend, Montana. We're up there as well. Give them a check out next time you're through Townsend, or if you're heading up to Helena, we're in there. The Daily Coffee Bar over on North Rouse. Check them out as well. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Did I miss anybody? That's it for now, but stay tuned.
This has been great, Logan. It's been fantastic. I think you've shared, you know, your personal story in a way that other people who want to start a craft business, no matter what it is, can take away a lot from the excitement, the creativity, how you jumped in, how you learned about something you knew very little about in the beginning.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having us here, Bill.
I hope you enjoyed our time with Logan. Here are my thoughts on what we learned. First, Logan is yet another example of where a little bit of luck leads to an opportunity. Although it wasn't lucky to hurt his shoulder, it did lead to his interest in craft chocolate. For anyone who dreams of having their own startup, look for the opportunity that really speaks to you. Second, is to be really passionate about your product. I think you felt the love he has for his chocolate and the commitment to quality. That is at the center of the craft movement, but I also think it is a big part of the Montana spirit. Craft production brings us a product of much higher quality, coupled with a founder who's actually dedicated to creativity with their product. Finally, Logan, like most founders, is a continuous learner. As an entrepreneur, it is critical to success. Becoming more efficient, having a unique product, and improving quality requires continuous learning. Also, learning how we tap into the needs of the customer. So as you are on your startup journey, I encourage you to take these lessons to heart and see what you can do to get on your own scrappy startup journey. Now, please check out Cadera Cacao and support craft producers and all of the organizations that Logan talked about today. Hopefully you get a chance to visit them on your visit to Bozeman, Montana.